My name is Sophia. I'm 29 years old, and for most of my life, I believed my biggest weakness was trusting my family too much. I was wrong. My biggest weakness was assuming they would never try to steal from me, quietly, politely, with smiles on their faces, while I was gone. The night I found out the truth, I wasn't even looking for it. I was packing for a 3-week work trip to Seattle, folding clothes on my bed, when my phone buzzed with a notification I almost ignored. It was a message in our family group chat, the one I muted years ago because it usually consisted of my parents complaining about money and my older brother asking for favors he never returned. But something made me tap it. Mom, we'll handle it while Sophia's away. It'll be easier if she doesn't know until it's done. My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Handle what? Easier if I didn't know what? Before I could reply, another message came through. Dad, she'll calm down once he's already settled in. Then my brother Mark sent a laughing emoji. That's when I knew. They were planning to move my brother into my house that I bought alone, paid for alone, and worked myself into the ground to afford while I was out of town, without asking, without telling me, without caring. And the worst part? This wasn't the first time Mark had tried something like this. It was just the first time I caught them before it happened. I bought my house 5 years ago, right after my promotion at the architecture firm. It wasn't huge, but it was mine, a 3-bedroom place with a small yard, sunlight pouring into the kitchen every morning, and silence that felt like safety. I had grown up in chaos, in a house where everything belonged to everyone, except somehow nothing ever belonged to me. Mark, on the other hand, had never known consequences. He was 4 years older, louder, needier, and endlessly protected. He dropped out of college twice, he bounced between jobs, he borrowed money he never repaid, and every single time my parents explained it away. He's just going through a phase. He needs support. You're more independent, Sophia, you understand. What they really meant was, you'll manage. He won't. When I bought my house, my parents congratulated me, briefly, before asking how soon Mark could stay for a while if he needed to. I said no, calmly, firmly, repeatedly. Mark didn't need a place to stay. He needed responsibility, and I refused to be his safety net again. That refusal made me the villain. 2 months before my trip, Mark lost his apartment again. According to him, it wasn't his fault. The landlord was crazy, the roommates were toxic, the job market was rigged. My parents started calling more often after that. So, how many rooms do you really use? Your guest room is empty most of the time, right? Family helps family, Sophia. Each time I said no. And each time their voices grew colder. So when I saw those messages, I wasn't shocked. I was furious. I didn't respond in the group chat. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't cancel my trip. Instead, I sat down on the edge of my bed, phone in my hand, and smiled. If they thought they could sneak behind my back, move Mark into my house, and force me to accept it after the fact, they had no idea who they were dealing with. The next morning, I called my lawyer, then my neighbor, then my security company. I didn't tell my parents a thing. I let them believe their plan was working. I let them believe I was clueless, and that was their biggest mistake. Before leaving for Seattle, I made changes, small ones, quiet ones. I installed additional security cameras inside the house, fully legal, fully disclosed in the paperwork, covering entry points and shared spaces only. I upgraded the smart locks and changed access permissions. I moved personal documents into a locked safe. I took photos of every room, every drawer, every shelf, time-stamped proof of the condition of my home. I also left something else behind. a welcome. The day I flew out, I hugged my parents at the airport. My mom smiled too brightly. "Don't worry about the house," she said casually. "We'll keep an eye on things." I smiled back. "I know you will." Mark didn't come to the airport. He never did when things didn't benefit him directly. That night, alone in my hotel room, I opened the security app on my phone and waited. It didn't take long. 3 days into my trip, at exactly 2:17 p.m., the front door camera sent an alert. Motion detected. I watched as my parents' car pulled into my driveway. My hands were shaking, not with fear, but with adrenaline. They unlocked the door using an old access code I had deliberately left active. Then Mark stepped inside, carrying a suitcase, then another, then boxes. My mother pointed around the living room, gesturing like she owned the place. My father nodded. Mark dropped his bags in my guest room and flopped on my couch like a king claiming his throne. I recorded everything, every word, every laugh, every assumption. At one point, Mark opened my fridge and said, "Guess this is my place now." My mother replied, "She'll get over it." That was the moment I knew I was done being polite. I didn't call them. I didn't text. I let them settle in. I let Mark unpack. I let my parents feel victorious. And then I sprung the trap. The next morning, while Mark was still asleep in my guest room, the doorbell rang. 2 people stood outside. One was my lawyer. The other was a county housing enforcement officer. Because, you see, my parents didn't just move Mark in, they illegally transferred occupancy without the homeowner's consent. And I had proof, video proof, time-stamped proof, signed documents proving sole ownership. They thought family would protect them. They forgot the law doesn't care about family. By the time my phone rang, my mother calling in a panic, I was already sipping coffee, calm as ever. I answered sweetly. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was shaking. "Sophia, what did you do?" I smiled. I protected my house. And that was just the beginning. When I returned from my trip, I didn't go straight home. That was the first rule of the trap. Observe before confronting. I parked my car 2 streets away and walked back slowly, my suitcase rolling behind me, my heart pounding harder with every step. From the corner, I could already see lights on in my house. My house, the one I paid for, the one I had locked before leaving. A car I didn't recognize was parked in my driveway, my brother Mark's beat-up sedan, the same one my parents had helped him temporarily replace after he crashed his last one. I stood there longer than I expected, watching silhouettes move behind my curtains, hearing muffled laughter through an open window. They were comfortable, too comfortable, like people who believed they had already won. I didn't go in. Instead, I turned around and walked to the cafe at the end of the block, ordered a coffee I didn't drink, and called my lawyer. Her name was Denise, and I had hired her 2 years earlier when I bought the house, mostly because I'd learned the hard way that my family didn't respect boundaries unless there were legal consequences. I told her everything in a low voice, my parents' vague comments before my trip, the copied key I'd discovered missing, the neighbor's message, the lights on in my house. Denise didn't sound surprised, she sounded prepared. She told me to take photos of the car, record any proof of occupancy, and not to confront anyone yet. "Let them think they're settled," she said. "People reveal more when they're comfortable." So I waited. I walked the long way back, circled the block, and quietly entered through the back door using the code I'd never shared with anyone. The house smelled different. Fried food, cologne I didn't use, that heavy sense of invasion that sits in your chest when someone crosses a line you can't uncross. Shoes I didn't recognize were by the door. Mark's jacket was slung over my chair. My mother's voice drifted from the living room, light and cheerful the way it always was when she thought she was being clever. "It's perfect," she was saying. "She won't mind once she sees how much sense this makes." I stood in the hallway, phone recording, my hands shaking, not with fear, but with something colder, resolve. I stepped into the living room and the silence hit like a dropped plate. Mark was sprawled on my couch, feet on my coffee table, a beer in his hand. My father was adjusting the thermostat. My mother froze mid-sentence. For a split second, none of them spoke. Then my mom smiled, the practiced one she used when she wanted something. "Sophia, you're back early." I didn't smile. I didn't yell. I simply asked, "Why are you in my house?" They all started talking at once. Mark jumped up, acting offended. "Relax, Soph, it's not like I moved in or anything." My father cleared his throat and said something about family helping family. My mother waved her hand dismissively. "We were going to tell you. Mark's lease fell through, and this just made sense. You have the space. You're not even here half the time." That sentence broke something open in me. "You're not even here half the time." As if my absence was an invitation, as if my life, my work trips, my independence were evidence that I didn't deserve what I had built. I told them to sit down. They did, slowly, warily, like people who suddenly realized the tone had shifted. I sat across from them and placed my phone on the table, screen up, recording light blinking. "I know about the copied key," I said calmly. "I know you planned this before I left. I know you intended to move Mark in while I was gone and present it as a done deal." My mother's smile faltered. Mark scoffed. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said, "I'm being accurate." That's when my father spoke, his voice heavy with disappointment, the kind he'd always used when I didn't comply. "Sophia, you're young. You don't understand how families work. Mark needs stability. You have more than you need." There it was, the old script. I was always the one with more responsibility, more expectations, more pressure to give. Mark was always the one who needed understanding. I leaned forward. "This house is not a family resource. It is my property, and what you did is trespassing." My mother gasped as if I'd slapped her. "How dare you say that about your own parents?" "I'm saying it because it's true." That's when Mark exploded. He accused me of being selfish, of thinking I was better than everyone else, of forgetting where I came from. He said I owed him because he'd had it harder. He said I wouldn't even miss the space. Every word felt rehearsed, like they'd practiced this argument in my living room while I was gone. I waited until he finished. Then I stood up and did the one thing they didn't expect. I handed them an envelope. Inside were printed screenshots of text messages, my mother coordinating with Mark, my father talking about moving things over gradually, a message from Mark bragging to a friend that he'd basically secured a free house. There were copies of the security footage showing them entering with the copied key, a formal letter from Denise outlining unlawful occupancy, trespass, and the legal consequences if they didn't leave within 24 hours. The room went very quiet. "You set me up," my mother whispered. "No," I said, "I let you reveal yourselves." They tried to backtrack. My father suddenly wanted to talk calmly. My mother cried, saying she never meant to hurt me. Mark laughed nervously, saying lawyers were overkill. I didn't argue. I simply repeated, "You have 24 hours." They left that night, furious and humiliated. Mark peeled out of the driveway. My parents didn't hug me goodbye. My mother didn't look back. When the door closed, I sank to the floor and cried, not because I felt guilty, but because I finally allowed myself to grieve the family I kept hoping they'd become. But the trap wasn't finished. The next morning, my neighbor called. "Your parents are back," she said, "with a moving truck." I laughed, actually laughed, because by then the final step was already in motion. Denise had advised me to anticipate escalation. People who feel entitled rarely accept consequences quietly. I drove home slowly, not panicked this time, but ready. When I arrived, a police car was already outside. Mark was arguing with an officer. My parents were gesturing wildly. The moving truck sat idle. The officer approached me. "Are you Sophia?" "Yes." "Is this your property?" "Yes." He nodded and turned back to them. "Ma'am, sir, you've been formally warned. You are not permitted on this property without the owner's consent. Any further attempts will result in charges." My mother looked at me like she didn't recognize me. "You called the police on us." "I didn't," I said truthfully. "My lawyer did, after you ignored the legal notice." That was the moment the power shifted permanently. Mark cursed under his breath. My father's shoulders slumped. My mother started crying again, but this time it sounded different, less manipulative, more desperate. They left without another word. The truck pulled away. The street went quiet. In the weeks that followed, the fallout spread through the family like a shockwave. Relatives called to scold me. Others called quietly to say they understood. My parents told everyone I had changed, that success had made me cold. I didn't correct them. I didn't defend myself. I focused on changing the locks, installing better security, and most importantly, rebuilding my sense of safety. Mark didn't speak to me for months. When he finally did, it wasn't to apologize, it was to ask for money. I said no. My parents stopped inviting me to family gatherings unless Mark wasn't there. Eventually, they stopped inviting me at all. And something surprising happened in that silence. I felt lighter. Without the constant pressure to prove I was generous enough, patient enough, forgiving enough, I started to enjoy my life more. My house became a home again. Friends came over without tension. I traveled without guilt. I stopped bracing myself every time my phone buzzed. One evening, months later, my mother showed up alone. She looked older, smaller. She asked to come in. I let her sit on the porch instead. She told me Mark had moved back in with them, that things were hard, that she missed me. I listened. When she finished, I said, "I love you, but I won't be sacrificed anymore." She nodded, tears in her eyes, and left. Setting the trap wasn't about revenge. It had been about clarity, about finally seeing and letting myself be seen, not as the solution to everyone else's problems, but as a person with rights, limits, and worth. My parents tried to take my house while I was away. Instead, they lost access to the version of me who would have let them. And I don't regret it, not for a second.